The Zephyrian Empire had a reputation that preceded it across 17 different star clusters, much like a particularly unpleasant smell that somehow manages to travel through the vacuum of space. For 3,000 cycles, their war machine had rolled through the galaxy with the subtlety of a supernova and twice the arrogance. General Vextek stood at the helm of their latest conquest fleet, his 4 arms crossed in what passed for satisfaction among his species, watching another star system bend the knee. 47 systems had fallen before his tactical brilliance. 47 civilizations had looked upon his crimson carapace and decided that surrendering was preferable to becoming cosmic dust. The Andromedans had lasted 6 hours. The Centaurians managed an impressive 2 days before their will crumbled like a poorly constructed sandcastle in a hurricane. Even the notoriously stubborn Regelians threw in the towel after witnessing what Zephyrian plasma cannons could do to their supposedly impregnable defense platforms, which made the current intelligence briefing all the more amusing. "Humans," Admiral Thecamore announced, his voice carrying the kind of incredulity usually reserved for discovering that someone had tried to use a butter knife as a starship engine. "Intelligence classification, harmless primitives. Military threat level, negligible to non-existent." Vextek examined the holographic display with the interest of someone watching paint dry in slow motion. The third planet from a rather ordinary yellow star harbored approximately 8 billion bipedal mammals, who had somehow managed to avoid blowing themselves to pieces long enough to achieve basic spaceflight. Their largest weapons were chemical explosives that couldn't punch through standard civilian shielding. Their space presence consisted of a few research stations and some satellites that looked like they'd been assembled by particularly ambitious children using spare parts. "They call their species humanity," the Thecamore continued, apparently finding the name as threatening as a particularly fluffy kitten. "Recent intelligence suggests they've discovered our presence in their local cluster. Current response: they want to talk." The bridge erupted in what passed for laughter among the Zephyrian command crew. Vextek allowed himself a rare display of humor, his mandibles clicking in amusement. 3,000 years of galactic expansion, and they'd finally encountered a species whose first instinct wasn't to start shooting or running. These humans actually wanted to negotiate. How refreshingly naive, Vextek mused, studying the tactical readouts that painted humanity as about as militarily relevant as a soap bubble in a thunderstorm. "Very well. We shall accommodate their desire for conversation. Assemble a token force." "How many ships, General?" the Thecamore inquired, already knowing that token force in Zephyrian terms still qualified as overwhelming superiority by most galactic standards. 50 should suffice. We wouldn't want to appear rude by bringing too few." The journey to the human homeworld took exactly 4 standard cycles, during which the Zephyrian fleet maintained formation with the precision of a military parade and the casual confidence of predators approaching a particularly slow herbivore. Intelligence updates continued to paint humanity in increasingly amusing terms. No shields worth mentioning, no energy weapons, no faster-than-light military vessels. They had somehow achieved interstellar communication and basic space travel while remaining approximately as dangerous as a strongly worded letter. Their welcoming committee consisted of exactly 1 ship. "Sir," the communications officer reported, his voice carrying the barely controlled mirth of someone trying not to laugh during a funeral. "The humans are requesting permission to come aboard for negotiations." Vextek studied the approaching vessel through the viewport. If generosity prevailed, one might call it a ship. If honesty prevailed, one might call it a collection of metal held together by optimism and what appeared to be some form of primitive welding. The thing looked like it had been designed by committee, built by enthusiastic amateurs, and maintained by someone who had learned engineering from picture books. Granted, Vextek decided. Let us see what passes for diplomacy among these primitives. Dr. Mira Kozlov stepped aboard the Zephyrian flagship with the unhurried grace of someone taking a leisurely stroll through a park. She wore a simple dark suit that managed to look both professional and completely out of place among the gleaming metal corridors and towering alien warriors. Her expression carried the kind of calm confidence that suggested she either had nerves of steel or a fundamental misunderstanding of her current situation. Vextek received her in his command chamber, a space designed to intimidate visiting dignitaries into submission through sheer architectural overwhelming. Crystalline displays showed the positions of his fleet in real time. Holographic star charts detailed the extent of Zephyrian conquests. Battle standards from 47 subjugated worlds hung from the ceiling like cosmic hunting trophies. Dr. Kozlov looked around with the mild interest of a tourist visiting a moderately impressive museum. "General Vexthek," she said, offering what appeared to be a traditional human greeting gesture. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I'm Dr. Mira Kozlov, representing Earth's diplomatic corps." "Kozlov," Vexthek replied, allowing a note of condescension to color his words like food coloring in water. "Your species' desire for dialogue is quaint. However, I fear you may have misunderstood the nature of this encounter." "Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding, Dr. Kozlov replied, settling into the chair provided with the casual comfort of someone attending a particularly boring committee meeting. "You're here to demand our surrender, offer us the choice between subjugation and annihilation, and generally establish your dominance through superior firepower." Vexthek blinked, which among Zephyrians involved considerably more eye movements than most species found comfortable to watch. "Your directness is unexpected. We prefer efficiency, Dr. Kozlov explained, crossing her legs and adopting the posture of someone settling in for a lengthy but predictable conversation. "So let's discuss terms." What followed was perhaps the most surreal negotiation in Zephyrian military history. Dr. Kozlov listened to the standard demands with the patience of a teacher explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. Unconditional surrender, resource extraction rights, population relocation, military occupation, the complete dismantling of human civilization as they knew it. She took notes. "I see," she said finally, reviewing her tablet with the same expression someone might use when checking a grocery list. "Those are certainly comprehensive demands. However, I'm afraid humanity must respectfully decline." The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to have weight. Admiral Vecamor's breathing apparatus wheezed audibly. The bridge crew exchanged glances that suggested they were witnessing either unprecedented courage or spectacular stupidity. "Decline," Vexthek repeated, as if the word were a foreign concept that had somehow wandered into his vocabulary by mistake. "Decline," Dr. Kozlov confirmed cheerfully. "We appreciate the offer, truly, but we're not interested in subjugation at this time." Vexthek leaned forward, his massive frame creating shadows that engulfed the human diplomat. "Dr. Kozlov, perhaps you fail to comprehend the situation. My fleet carries enough firepower to reduce your planet to constituent atoms. Your military forces consist of chemical rockets and primitive kinetic weapons. You have no shields, no energy weapons, no defensive platforms capable of deterring even our smallest escort vessels." "That's all quite accurate," Dr. Kozlov agreed with the kind of casual acknowledgement someone might use when discussing weather patterns. "However, it doesn't change our position." "Then you choose extinction over submission." Dr. Kozlov appeared to consider this question with the gravity it deserved, tilting her head slightly as if weighing complex philosophical implications. "Well, when you put it like that, it does sound rather dramatic. Tell you what, give us 24 hours to consider your generous offer. I'll need to consult with my government." Vexthek studied the human diplomat with growing confusion. In 47 previous conquests, negotiations had never proceeded quite like this. Most species either surrendered immediately upon seeing his fleet or launched doomed attacks that ended predictably. None had ever asked for time to consider subjugation as if it were a business proposal. "Very well," he decided finally. 24 hours. Use them wisely. Dr. Kozlov stood and offered another of those peculiar human greeting gestures. "Thank you, General. Oh, and there is one small matter. As a gesture of good faith, humanity would like to offer tribute to the Zephyrian Empire." "Tribute?" the Kamor interjected, his voice carrying surprise mixed with suspicious pleasure. "A token of respect," Dr. Kozlov explained. "We'll be sending several transport vessels to your fleet within the next few hours, and I'd like to present you with a small ceremonial gift from our people." She produced a device roughly the size of a human hand, composed of metals and crystalline components that looked remarkably sophisticated for a primitive civilization. The craftsmanship was actually quite impressive, suggesting that human technology might be more advanced than initial intelligence had indicated. "What does it do?" Vexthek inquired, accepting the device with careful curiosity. "It's a cultural artifact, Dr. Kozlov replied with a smile that somehow managed to be both genuine and completely unreadable. "A symbol of human ingenuity and our hope for peaceful coexistence." After Dr. Kozlov departed, the Zephyrian command crew examined the gift with the fascination typically reserved for discovering new forms of primitive art. The device was clearly inactive, showing no energy signatures or technological functions that their scanners could identify. It appeared to be exactly what the human had claimed, a ceremonial trinket from a species trying to curry favor with their obvious superiors. The tribute ships began arriving 6 hours later. 12 vessels approached the Zephyrian fleet in a formation that managed to look both respectful and vaguely apologetic. They were larger than the initial diplomatic ship but maintained the same aesthetic of functional simplicity over elegant design. Each vessel requested permission to dock with different ships in the Zephyrian fleet, presumably to distribute their tribute cargo efficiently. "Rather organized for primitives," Admiral Vekamor observed, watching the human ships maneuver with competent precision. "Perhaps their diplomatic corps possesses more skill than their military," Vexthek replied, still examining the ceremonial device Dr. Kozlov had presented. The craftsmanship really was quite remarkable. The metal work showed techniques that suggested a more sophisticated understanding of materials science than their intelligence reports had indicated. The tribute ships completed their docking procedures with clockwork efficiency. Human crews transferred cargo containers filled with what appeared to be examples of their art, technology, and cultural artifacts. The Zephyrian ship's crews received these offerings with the kind of condescending appreciation typically reserved for children's artwork. Dr. Kozlov returned exactly 24 hours later, punctual to the minute. "General," she said, settling into the same chair with the same casual confidence, "we've reached our decision." "And?" Vexthek prompted, though the answer seemed inevitable given humanity's complete lack of alternatives. "We accept your offer." Vexthek blinked again, this time in genuine surprise. "You accept?" "Conditionally," Dr. Kozlov clarified, consulting her tablet with the air of someone reviewing terms and conditions. "We'll need to discuss implementation details, of course. Timeline, administrative structures, resource allocation procedures, the usual bureaucratic necessities." Victory had never felt quite so anticlimactic. Vexthek had prepared for defiant last stands, desperate attacks, or tearful pleas for mercy. He had not prepared for humanity to approach their own subjugation like a corporate merger. "Very well," he said, activating his command console to begin implementing standard occupation protocols. "We shall begin with." Nothing happened. Vexthek pressed the activation sequence again. Still nothing. The console, which had functioned flawlessly for 15 cycles of continuous service, had apparently chosen this moment to develop technical difficulties. "Admiral," he called to Thekamor, "contact the fleet and begin deployment of occupation forces." The Kamor's expression carried the kind of confusion typically associated with discovering that basic mathematics had stopped working. "Sir, I'm receiving no response from the fleet. Communications appear to be offline." Dr. Kozlov continued to study her tablet with unruffled concentration. "Oh, I should probably mention, those tribute ships weren't actually tribute ships." The temperature in the command chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Vexthek slowly turned to face the human diplomat, who looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who had just remembered a mildly interesting detail. "I'm sorry," Vexthek said, though he had heard her perfectly clearly. "The ships we sent to your fleet," Dr. Kozlov explained with helpful clarity, "they weren't delivering tribute. They were delivering rather sophisticated electronic warfare packages. Quite effective ones, actually. Your entire fleet should be experiencing comprehensive systems failures right about now." As if summoned by her words, emergency alerts began cascading across every functional display in the command chamber. Weapons offline, shields offline, propulsion offline, life support functioning at minimal levels, communications completely severed. And that gift I gave you, Dr. Kozlov continued conversationally, wasn't exactly a ceremonial artifact. It was a signal amplifier, quite necessary for coordinating the timing of the electronic attack across all 50 of your ships simultaneously. Vexthek stared at the device in his hand as if it had suddenly transformed into a venomous serpent, which in a sense it had. The wonderful thing about electronic warfare, Dr. Kozlov mused, standing and walking to the viewport that showed the Zephyrian fleet, is that it renders superior firepower somewhat irrelevant. Hard to use plasma cannons when your targeting systems think they're coffee makers. Through the viewport, Vexthek could see new contacts appearing on the long-range sensors, ships that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago, ships that looked considerably more sophisticated than the primitive vessels humanity had initially presented. Where did those come from? Admiral Kamor demanded, his voice carrying the kind of panic typically reserved for discovering that the laws of physics had been repealed. Oh, they were always there, Dr. Kozlov replied cheerfully. Stealth technology. Another one of those areas where humanity has made some rather impressive advances. Amazing what you can accomplish when you focus on making problems disappear rather than making larger explosions. The tactical display, despite its compromised state, managed to provide enough information to paint a picture that would have been hilarious if it weren't so thoroughly terrifying. The Zephyrian fleet, pride of a galactic empire, sat dead in space like expensive paperweights. Meanwhile, humanity's actual military forces had revealed themselves in positions that suggested they had been planning this encounter for considerably longer than 24 hours. Dr. Kozlov, Vexthek said slowly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone who had just realized they were standing on much thinner ice than previously suspected. What exactly does humanity want? What we've always wanted, she replied, returning to her seat with the same casual grace. Peace. The thing is, we've discovered that the most efficient way to achieve peace is to make war impossible for the other party to conduct. She gestured toward the tactical display showing the surrounded and disabled Zephyrian fleet. Your ships are intact, your crews are unharmed. Your weapons systems will be restored to full functionality once you depart our space. We have no interest in conquest, occupation or subjugation. We simply want to be left alone. And if we refuse, Dr. Kozlov's smile carried the kind of patient sympathy typically reserved for explaining basic concepts to small children. General, your fleet is currently held in position by precisely calibrated tractor beams. Your weapons are offline. Your communications are severed. Your life support is functioning at the absolute minimum necessary to keep you alive. Exactly what position are you in to refuse anything? The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of emergency power systems and the gradually dawning realization that humanity had been playing a completely different game than anyone had suspected. However, Dr. Kozlov continued, we're reasonable people. We understand that returning to your empire with news of a complete defeat might present certain career challenges for you personally. So we're prepared to offer an alternative arrangement. Vexthek found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. What kind of arrangement? Join us. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the fundamental order of the universe. Join them. The Zephyrian Empire's most successful general. Join a species of primitive mammals who had just demonstrated that they could disable his entire fleet without firing a shot. Your strategic mind is clearly exceptional. Dr. Kozlov continued, apparently interpreting his stunned silence as thoughtful consideration. 47 successful conquests represent genuinely impressive military achievement. However, your approach has always been to solve problems through superior force application. We prefer to solve problems by making them irrelevant. She gestured again toward the tactical display. This encounter, for example, you saw a primitive species to be conquered. We saw an educational opportunity. You brought overwhelming firepower to ensure victory. We brought overwhelming intelligence to ensure that firepower became irrelevant. You want me to work for you? With us, Dr. Kozlov corrected. Humanity doesn't believe in subjugation. Remember, we believe in collaboration. Your knowledge of galactic military structures combined with our approach to conflict resolution could prevent a great deal of unnecessary violence throughout the galaxy. Vexthek looked around his disabled command chamber,
at his panicked crew, at the tactical displays showing his supposedly invincible fleet held helpless by a species that was supposed to be harmless primitives. The great general who had conquered 47 star systems was experiencing the novel sensation of being thoroughly, comprehensively and elegantly outmaneuvered. And if I refuse this generous offer, Dr. Kozlov's expression carried genuine regret, as if she were disappointed by the necessity of explaining unpleasant reality. Then you'll be returned to Zephyrian space with your fleet intact and a story that nobody will believe. Your empire will assume you've suffered some form of mental breakdown. Your military career will end in disgrace and suspicion. You'll spend the rest of your life trying to convince people that a species of primitive mammals defeated the pride of the Zephyrian navy without firing a shot. She paused to let this prospect sink in. Alternatively, you could stay here, help us develop more efficient methods of conflict prevention and contribute to a galaxy where problems get solved through intelligence rather than destruction. The great General Vexthek, conqueror of 47 star systems, terror of 3 galactic sectors, found himself in the unprecedented position of having absolutely no good options. His fleet was disabled. His career was effectively over. His choice was between professional disgrace and something entirely new. He looked at Dr. Kozlov, who waited patiently for his decision with the serene confidence of someone who had already calculated all possible outcomes. Then for the first time in his military career, General Vexthek knelt.
"Take me," he said,
The words emerging with the weight of complete surrender. "Just don't kill me." Dr. Kozlov's smile carried genuine warmth for the first time in their acquaintance. "General, we were never going to kill you. That would defeat the entire purpose of the exercise." 6 months later, General Vexthek sat in a comfortable office overlooking Lake Geneva, reviewing tactical analyses that bore no resemblance to anything he had studied during his previous military career. Instead of invasion strategies, he was developing protocols for preventing conflicts before they could begin. Instead of conquest plans, he was creating frameworks for turning potential enemies into collaborative partners. The work was fascinating in ways he had never anticipated. His assistant, Commander Elena Vasquez, entered with the day's intelligence briefings. "The Andromedans have requested a meeting," she reported. "Apparently they're interested in discussing alternative approaches to territorial disputes." Take reviewed the request with the kind of professional satisfaction that came from seeing former enemies voluntarily seek better solutions. Word of humanity's unique approach to conflict resolution was spreading throughout the galaxy with remarkable speed. Empire after empire was discovering that traditional military strategies seemed suddenly inadequate when facing opponents who could make warfare itself irrelevant. Schedule the meeting, he decided, and prepare the usual demonstration materials. As Commander Vasquez departed, Vexthek returned his attention to the view outside his window. Humans moved through their daily lives with the casual confidence of a species that had solved the ancient problem of making peace more profitable than war. They had taken the galaxy's most successful military commander and transformed him into something unprecedented, a strategist whose primary objective was preventing the need for strategy. The irony was not lost on him. Humanity really was a species of pacifists. They had simply discovered that the most effective way to maintain peace was to make war impossible for everyone else to conduct successfully. Outside his window, the sun set over a world that had never needed to conquer anyone to become the most influential civilization in the galaxy. Sometimes, Vexthek reflected, the most powerful victory was the one that convinced your enemies they had never wanted to fight in the first place.